Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests tell their story with the help of 12 questions in just 30 minutes. I'm your host, Mike Solitro, and today we are very excited to be speaking with Tom Fox. Tom is the voice of compliance, having founded the only podcast network in compliance, the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. It currently has 60 podcasts. Tom has won multiple awards for podcast hosting and producing. He's been honored with awards for series as diverse as Looking Back on 9/11, Understanding Lyme Disease, and the Trial of the Century, the Enron Trial. He's an executive leader at the C-Suite Network, the world's most trusted network of C-Suite leaders. He's also the co-founder of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. Tom is also a best-selling author, having written 25 books in the areas of compliance, business ethics, and leadership. He's the author of the seminal work, The Compliance Handbook, 4th edition. He recently published his first children's book, Being a Compliance Officer is Awesome, which was an Amazon bestseller in its first week. He can be reached at tfox at tfoxlaw.com. Tom, welcome. We are really thrilled to be speaking with you.
Mike, many thanks and honor to be here with you today.
That's nice to hear. Thank you. So I think most people know and understand for the most part what compliance is, but when you meet somebody new, how do you explain it to them before they ask, I don't really get that?
Compliance is complying with the laws and regulations that apply to any business, whether you're a one-person podcasting network in the hill country of West Texas, or whether you're a $50 billion multinational, or you're Walmart, the world's biggest retailer with 2.5 million employees. You have rules and regulations you have to comply with. And I help companies set up policies and procedures to do that.
Okay, that's an excellent definition. And as you use words like rules, regulations, and policies, I know most people, let alone businesses, kind of shiver to say, no, thank you. So first of all, how did you get involved and decide this is what I want to do?
I'm a lawyer by professional training, and I was a trial lawyer for 25 years. Then I went into the in-house world. In my last position in the in-house world, I was general counsel of a company that had violated a U.S. law which prevents U.S. companies from engaging in bribery and corruption outside the United States. It's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And that was my first real exposure to compliance. And what I found was I had to build out a compliance program for my company, and I really enjoyed the nuts and bolts of building out a program inside an organization. So that's how I sort of stumbled into this field.
That's if I can say, it's a hell of a way to do that. Were you there from the beginning? What part did you walk into that situation?
I was part of they threw out all the prior managers and execs who had either engaged in or facilitated the bribery and corruption. And I was part of the new management team that was brought in to build out a policy and procedures in accordance with an agreement the company reached with the federal government.
So as much as you can talk about it and as much as you want to get into it, what does day one like that look like? Or is there a playbook? Are you starting from scratch? Are people trying to help? Are people trying to get out of there? What does that look like?
Back then, it was a relatively new field, although there were some guidelines from various Department of Justice releases of information. There were other enforcement actions which told us what was expected. And of course, we had our own outside counsel who was assisting us, and we were able to put together for what in 2007 was a best practices compliance program.
Okay. So the podcast network has got a good number of shows, a wide ranging area of topics. How did you get that started, and how did you know this is where you wanted to focus?
In my last corporate position, the company was sold, so my job went away, and I decided I really wanted to do the same work as an outside consultant. So I became the nuts and bolts guy. I was laid up due to an accident, couldn't leave the house except to go to physical therapy. So I started engaging in social media and blogging. This was 2010. And I was the third blogger in the compliance space, and it was a marketing outreach. So I did that. And a couple of years later, I started a podcast as a natural outgrowth of blogging. In 2017, I founded the Compliance Podcast Network because my vision was we'd create a one-stop shop of information for the compliance professional in the podcast format. There are three major players in terms of organizations, compliance organizations in America. So I went to each one of them and said, hey, let's get together. We'll form a consortium and we'll create a podcast network. I could get no interest. And so I basically said, bleep it, I'll do it myself. And so I did it, trucked along for a couple of years. 2019, I decided it was time to either fully commit to this or go back to practicing law. So I quit practicing law, built out this huge network of infrastructure, bought all the cool toys. At the end of the year, I'd made about $10,000. And I thought, well, that was an interesting experiment. Time to go back to practicing law. So I did that in Q1 of 2020 till they shut the country down because of COVID. And what happened was, starting about May 15 of that year, literally every product provider in the compliance space called me with the same question, which was, how long to get access to your network? Because I had a huge social media following. And of course, well, and at least in my industry, almost all marketing was done in person, conferences, trade shows, breakfast roundtables, et cetera. And so none of that was available. And I had the only online network. And because of the work I'd done in 2019, my answer was 24 hours. It was simply just a drop and drag or plug and play because of this huge infrastructure I built out. And my little world literally blew up. I went from 5,000 a month to 35,000 a month in income in 1 month. And since that time, I've been trying to consolidate the explosion of growth I had in the network.
That's incredible and very fortuitous, and I'm sure it's exactly as you mapped it out in 2019. So that's very good forward thinking there. I want to follow up on a couple things. We'll start at the end and then kind of work our way back. So you get this kind of rush of demand, and you said 24 hours because of the work that you had put in. What is something that you did not anticipate with this rush that you've kind of had to either build on the back end, or you've adjusted as you've seen more people interested in both listening and being on air?
Well, having the network built out, if that had happened and I didn't have the network built out, one, I don't know if I could have done it. But the other thing was, think of where you were in May of 2020. I was sitting at home and my wife and I never left the house except to get groceries. And so I had nothing to do but work all day, literally nothing. And so I worked 12 to 15 hours a day and I did everything myself. And because of those sort of facts, and I mean, if it had been a regular work scenario, I never would have had the time to, I was spending 4 to 6 hours a day on social media just to gin up the marketing aspect of all the podcasts I had. So it was really, when one of my favorite phrases is, when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. And that's what happened. And it was that confluence of events, but that confluence continued after I started getting all those calls, because I had the time and I learned social media marketing because I wasn't relying on an outside consultant to do it for me. So I learned how to do it. I learned how to make it effective. And I started getting 200,000 downloads a month on my overall on my network.
That's
so incredible. I was getting
incredible.
huge numbers that I could take to people and say, this is what I have.
And I love that luck quote, because most people will emphasize or focus on the end. Well, I'm not lucky. This is not happening for me. But it really is the preparation, the hard work piece that goes into the kind of making your own luck, and then jumping at the opportunity when either it presents itself or when you're there to make it happen. So very illustrative of that quote. And that's a wonderful story. Kind of going back to the beginning, the work of an outside consultant, was something that you wanted to do. You moved toward or move forward from a traditional legal job where it's kind of a 9 to 5. There's plenty of people, I'm sure, that you've talked to, that I've talked to in the last few years, that's what they'd like to do. They'd like to break away from what they had been doing into more of a consultant type, more entrepreneurial type role. How are you able to navigate that? And what do you tell anyone who's looking for advice?
The first thing is do it. Just do it. The two, once again, my circumstances were somewhat limited. And 2019, my company got sold in 2008. And I decided I really wanted to do with my life was race bicycles. So I was over 50. I could race in the senior division. So I went off on this great adventures in 2009, race bicycles until Saturday after Thanksgiving that year, when I got taken out by a Hummer on a training ride. So I ended my cycling career. And I realized at some point I was going to have to go back to work. So when I had enough energy to get on my walker and toddle into my office at home, I had no work, I had no clients, and the only thing I had on my hands was time. So I started exploring social media and I started tweeting LinkedIn. And I literally, in 6 months, built out a worldwide consulting practice out of my house because the only time I left my house was to go to physical therapy. And the two best pieces of advice I got were from one woman who said two things to me. One, if this is what you want to do it. But don't be like every lawyer I know and say you can do anything. If you want to do compliance and turn everything else down. And the second thing is you have to give it at least 6 months, but really a year. And so just commit yourself, mentally that you're going to do it. And I can remember sort of 6 months afterwards, I got a call from somebody in London and they said, tell me all your clients in Houston. And I thought I was living in Houston at the time. And I thought about it and I said, I don't have any clients in Houston. They're all across the world, simply because of the power of social media. And the messages I got from that experience were two. One is I'd always known when the universe closes one door, another opens. But what I didn't know was you have to have the courage to walk through that door. And because of the circumstances I was in at the time, I had the courage to walk through that door. And the second thing is that you can create anything you want. And I tell people all the way from high school students to I'm 66. And I tell people over 65, you want to do something different? Do it. Get on social media, tell people about yourself. And it's not that if you open it or build it, they'll come, but you can tell them what you're doing and you can show your professionalism. And podcasting is a great way to demonstrate yourself as a subject matter expert.
And that really is wonderful advice. The taking action to either eliminate fear, eliminate excuses, to get out there, make the mistakes you're going to make, learn. It's going to be a lot faster of a feedback loop than kind of reading, watching other people and learning in theory. And, you're absolutely right that being out there, whatever form of marketing you choose, putting yourself out there, becoming credible, becoming trustworthy, that's the way to establish yourself slowly but surely. And you mentioned that 6 month to a year period. That's good advice that I think most give, and the ones that succeed follow. But it's really hard during especially the beginning. And even, I've been doing this for 8 months and I'm not getting the kind of traction I want to see. Did you experiment with any testing? How did you know that you were on the right road as opposed to just kind of plowing along for the 12 months? What did you do to make sure?
Well, when I first became a compliance consultant, nothing, because I was laid up and I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go call on clients. I couldn't go meet people. I couldn't go to conferences, couldn't go have a drink, couldn't go to dinner. So it was pretty self-contained. Now, when I set up the podcast network and in 2019, I did get very discouraged. And there was a big conference in September and I was going to meet all these advertising execs. And I had this whole presentation and they said, nope, not interested. I don't have anything to do with you. And I was so discouraged. And I remember I was leaving this conference and this guy saw me leaving and he came over and he put his arm around me and said, you just keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right track. It's going to pay off. And he was right. And sometimes you just have to trust. And that's why setting a time limit, I think, is important. And for me, it was a year. And, I was fully committed to that mentally. And I was financially prepared to take a bath for a year. I did. But I had, reserved money so that I didn't need a lot of income. So you can do it. Don't pretend it's easy. And as you said, at 8 months or whenever it is, really discouraged, but you give yourself a year, keep it to that.
Good advice. Good advice. The social media piece of it's fascinating. How did you pick which platform you wanted to start on? Let's start there.
Well, it started on blogging, simply blogging on WordPress, and then that led to LinkedIn. And I'd always written a lot of articles as a lawyer. So the writing part was easy. I had to learn how not to write like a lawyer and write like a real person. So that took a little bit of time. But once I got used to the format, I love reading and writing. I'm endlessly curious. And it was actually the first year I did it every 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then the second year, I switched over to daily. And once I made that commitment, it was like a switch went off in my head and it became a part of my workday. And I had to budget an hour to write tomorrow's blog. Now, sometimes it was late at night or early in the morning, but once I made it a part of my workday, it became a part of my routine. So that's how that started.
I'm glad you said it that way because it really emphasizes the commitment and the preparation piece that I'm going to do this. I have a set cadence starting off 3 days, growing to the daily, and that I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to have what I need either the day before, have some sort of structure because that is how you've built what you are currently working with. Uh, so the blogging and the writing as a writing for a regular audience versus a legal audience, that's good advice. Um, how did you I mean, it's been a few years now. How have you been able to kind of, with being on different platforms that constantly are changing, looking for different content, looking for different type of information? How have you been able to stay up on that?
Well, they all evolve out of things that were existing from the past. And so it's all content creation. And I tell people, Mike, you give me a word, I'll give you a sentence. You give me a sentence, I'll give you a paragraph. You give me a paragraph, I'll give you a blog. You give me a blog, I'll give you a long form article or a white paper. And if you give me a white paper, I'll make that a chapter in a book. And you give me enough white papers, I'll have a book. And that's literally how I write. And the same is true in the podcast world, but there you're starting with the spoken word. So if I have a podcast, I can now I can use AI to create the first draft of a blog post out of it. So the whatever platform comes out, whether I'm not very good at TikTok, but I can create a short form video. I don't dance, but I can talk. So I talk, and all of those, it's just communications.
Okay. Okay. And for that person who has been staring at their screen, looking to get out of their 9 to 5, become an outside consultant, send their first tweet, post their first note on LinkedIn, what would you tell them besides just do it? What would make that content something that they would look back and say, that was terrible, but I'm glad I did it. And here's how I was able to build off of it.
Tweet about what you're passionate about. Write about what you're passionate about. Podcast about what you're passionate about. They say in the podcast world, people will come for the guest, but they'll stay for the host. And they stay for the host if that host is passionate. And everyone knows I am passionate about compliance. I started in the field of anti-corruption compliance. $3 trillion is lost annually to the global economy from bribery and corruption. And what motivated me, one of the things to get in this field, I felt like there was something I could contribute. And that was bringing anti-corruption compliance programs to the corporate world. Because I'd always worked in the corporate world. So I saw that as a mechanism to help right a wrong. And every day, everything I do pushes the ball forward, maybe just a little bit, but that's enough.
That's really solid advice because I think that what holds up people is one, they post or they draft material that they think somebody wants to hear about or what they should be writing about versus what they know, what they're passionate about, and letting that turn into something that people want to consume. And just kind of the theme that you've really hit on, that you put yourself out there, that you take it seriously, you have a plan and you execute that plan and you stick with it. That it's not, I'm going to try this for a short amount of time and to see what happens and try something else. That you are very passionate and you're very involved and you're credible in what you post. So I think that's really excellent. It applies across fields, not just legal, not just compliance or kind of serious business matters. I think that's very applicable. Switching gears here for a moment, you mentioned racing bicycles. How did you get started in that?
There was there's a race or a ride, I should say, every year in Texas called the MS 150, and it's a ride from Houston to Austin, and it's sort of your baptism into the cycling world. In the early part of the first decade, I lived in Colorado, and I started cycling there. And when I moved back to Houston in '04, and I just continued cycling, and I started riding in the MS. And then when I got laid off, a nice package, and I thought, I was Joe Jock in high school, and I've always worked out, and I love competition. And I thought, why not? I'm never going to have this opportunity again. It fails, but I gave it a shot.
Well, riding a bike on a street, especially 150 miles, that's got to be in good shape for that. And I applaud you for sticking with it. And then, an accident of that magnitude I looks like you've made a full recovery. So I'm gonna go with that. I'm glad that you have. Um, Also switching gears, for those just listening to this, you have a fantastic setup. I think I see Longhorns helmet, an old Oilers helmet, the Texans. It seems like a Patriots helmet is squeezed in there, and then two Michigan Wolverines helmets. Do I have those correct?
You do.
Okay.
The Patriots and one Wolverine helmet is because I'm a huge Tom Brady fan. I went to law school at Michigan. That's the other helmet. And I went to UT undergrad.
Okay. It makes sense. And you've got good taste in sports memorabilia and obviously excellent schools there. So we've covered a good amount of material. Um, you're no longer riding a bike, but what do you do to unwind, to relax when you're not writing, when you're not podcasting, when you're not in the serious world of compliance? How do you decompress?
So I do a job now that I love. And it's not a job because here's what I do all day. I sit and visit with people like you. Now I'm usually on the other side of the mic, but I get to talk to the smartest people, and it gives me the ability to see a very big picture because I'm talking to everyone and I'm putting all the pieces together. I'm an endlessly curious lifetime learner. And so that to me is relaxing. I was at a podcast conference and someone said, well, what's hard about podcasting? And I thought about it a minute and I said, there's nothing hard about podcasting. Try being a lawyer. That's hard. So I'm really in a job that I absolutely love that compared to being a lawyer is very stress-free. And I work out every day. So I work out an hour and a half to 2 hours every day.
Okay. That's a good kind of stress less at work, exercise. That's a good combination there. We have not gone over this, but I do feel I need to ask because it is to me one of the coolest names. Tom Fox, actual name, or is this for the podcast there?
Nope. Tom Fox, one word.
Tom Fox.
Thomas Robert Fox.
Okay. What's next for you? Where are you hoping to take your podcast network or your next endeavor the next 2 to 3 years?
So with the Compliance Podcast Network, I just want to see how big I can build it. My endless competition is, endlessly endless. So how big can I get it and where it goes? I don't know. You mentioned at the start, I have a second network, which is I live in a rural area of West Texas now, and I started a rural podcast network because I wanted to see if I could make a viable business model for rural businesses. My town has no TV, radio is internet, 2-day-a-week newspaper. And so there's really no mechanism to advertise for the local businessman. So I started a podcast to get local businessmen to do podcasts, but I also create social media marketing materials, just like you and I would use on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever it might be, to see if there's that sort of market. The newspaper is read by no one under the age of 50, and there's no way for local business people to reach probably a large percentage of the people in not only the town I live next to, but the county I live in. And I wanted to see if there's a viable economic model for both a businessman and a podcast network. We started a year ago. We've got 1,500 subscribers, and we have 15 podcasts on the network.
Wow, that's incredible. Such a short amount of time. How has it been different building that locally, and what have you been hearing from both the business owners and the audience?
So lots of compliments from people in the community. They really enjoy having essentially a local news show.
Yeah.
Except it's on Facebook because that's our primary posting platform. And the businessmen love it because they get marketing materials that's evergreen, and that's how I try to sell it to them. Plus, they get to show subject matter expertise. So I just finished an 8-part series with our local computer tech guy talking about basic computer maintenance, basic compare, basic data privacy and data security issues. and then he can use that in any marketing he chooses to go forward on.
That's such a great project. I love that. I'm so glad to hear that's going well, and I wish you continued success on that because I think that's something we're going to see a lot more out of the ability to be kind of hyper local in supporting each other, and then provide a network and a community for people who are using those services who may not know about it otherwise because there isn't a mechanism for them to find out of that. Wrapping up here, we're already at time. I bounced around a lot. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I probably should have?
No, you did a very good job. I really like your interview style. It's very engaging, very, very engaging.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom. Thank you. We covered the email address up top, but where would you like our listeners to find you if they want to find out more?
Sure. The Compliance Podcast Network, compliancepodcastnetwork.net, Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.com, email tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and you can reach out and hopefully I've given you some information that you can use. I have a ton and a half materials and happy to share about how to start a podcast or how to build a compliance program.
Fantastic. We will post all of those, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast. And like I said, I wish you nothing but the best and continued success. You've got an awesome story.
Thank you.